a really interesting panel, all different types of organizations joining us today. So I think we'll hear really about the different types of opportunities that are being extended to industry, to academics throughout New York City. And so, some of these groups go by different names: living labs, test beds, research centers, piloting programs. But everybody is really aiming to demonstrate new technologies that benefit the city, benefit the climate, that benefit the solution providers. And so, we'll go through and hear about that. In addition to the panel that we have here, there's some other interesting initiatives I just thought I would mention. The Partnership for New York also teamed up with the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, and they launched the Environmental Tech Lab, which recently announced its cohort of companies. And so that's another thing to keep an eye on, as well as the work that John and his colleagues at EDC, who recently produced a document called Pilot NYC with Cornell Tech, which really addresses gaps in the innovation ecosystem. So that was launched a couple of weeks ago. And so a lot of us here are also part of that initiative, working together, collaborating amongst ourselves to really, move the needle on innovation and how we look at technology within New York City. So I think without further ado, with those introductions, we'll meet the panel. And so I think we'll start, if everybody wants to just go through, introduce your program, maybe just start by telling us where you're located and the actual physical environments in which these are your programs are happening, because it sort of runs the gamut across the city.
Sure. So I can start. As mentioned, I direct the National Science Foundation Engineering Research Center for Smart Streetscapes. So our mission is to create more livable, safe, and inclusive communities through real-time, hyper-local applications at the streetscape. And so what that means is for us is to leverage advancing technologies in wireless, edge computing, situational awareness to actually help choreograph kind of local dynamics at the street. So bring it down to the human scale, smart cities at that sort of human scale. And we're a partnership. So Columbia, we're the lead institution, but we partner with two Florida schools, University of Central Florida, Florida Atlantic University, with Lehman College up in the Bronx, and also with Rutgers in New Jersey. And we actually have 3 urban test beds. Obviously, I think mostly focused on the New York City test bed for today. And we leverage the New York City test bed is actually right out the window here in our backyard in Harlem. And it's the Cosmos test bed. And this was an advanced urban wireless test bed that we're now still adding more capabilities to. And it was funded by the National Science Foundation with an industry consortium as well in 2018. And it covers about 1 square mile and effectively has beyond 5G wireless radio capabilities, has a dedicated fiber optic backhaul, and then edge computing infrastructure also to support that. So it's a tremendous playground, really, that we can leverage here in the city. It's also an FCC innovation zone, which means that when one wants to pilot technologies, in particular wireless communications, one doesn't need to each time apply for a special license for that. So it's really a highly flexible playground within which we can work and now actually do research in that space.
Mm-hmm. And so when you're talking about streetscapes, you're talking about the roadbed, the sidewalks. That's kind of the confines of
exactly. I think yes, the road, sidewalk, other public or spaces. Mm-hmm. So it could be parks as well. Yeah, anything in the public space. So mm-hmm. we feel that that's a place where we can make a real impact. So we're not going inside buildings, but it's the outdoors generally. Yeah.
Great. Jenny, you want to talk a bit about where you're operating?
So I run Yard Labs, the climate tech piloting program for the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which is a 300-acre Brooklyn waterfront, privately managed campus. It's largely a manufacturing campus. We are home to about 550 businesses. It's about 11,000 workers there. It is very large, as you can imagine, from 300 acres. Runs all the way from Dumbo on one end to South Williamsburg on the other, and everything in between. One of the great things for piloting is that we control our own streets, and we have a variety of building types because we were technically established in 1801. So we have sort of various levels of buildings and the challenges that comes with. So, and that is our two assets that people can pilot on and have piloted on for about 10 years, even before Yard Labs officially launched. There's the streets, which are just sort of easier to launch pilots from. An example of that is we had an autonomous vehicle pilot, Optimus Ride, a couple of years ago, which we were uniquely capable of hosting, and prop tech oriented pilots, which I'll talk maybe a little bit more about later. But yeah, we actually welcome all companies to pilot with us. Some of them are done in partnership with New Lab, which some of you have heard of, which is on the yard and a kind of deep tech incubator and accelerator. But others come to us just by word of mouth, or Paul, or Lauren or John, or just someone who may have seen our New York Times article. And we welcome anything that is hardware driven, can have a software component, but is hardware driven, solving some kind of urban tech problem, and with a focus in climate tech.
And so just to sort of recap, I'm just going to recap. So within the Navy Yard, you've got your buildings, and you have also a streetscape, but one that is privatized. So it's maybe a little bit easier to, get started than the big city, writ large.
Yeah. And in a coordinated sort of facilities management as well, so that among our many buildings, you can sort of come to a smaller team to be able to launch more quickly.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then there's also, you all generate your own power. Does that play into opportunities at all at the Navy Yard?
Yeah, it's both an opportunity and sometimes a challenge. We actually have 3 different energy providers that come into the yard. That's due to that, layered history that's been building for several centuries. But we do have a cogen plant that's on our facility as well. And we think there's some interesting opportunities to work with them going forward, but we're just now starting to get our hands around that.
Okay, great. John?
Hey, I run the Brooklyn Army Terminal, pilots at the Brooklyn Army Terminal, the program is called. And the Brooklyn Army Terminal itself is located on the Sunset Park waterfront. It's very similar asset to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, though maybe currently in less good shape, but very active, 95% tenanted. It's similar to what Jenny described. It's a enclosed campus environment. Most of the tenants are industrial manufacturing. There's some food tenants as well. And we're sort of just getting started, but I think like everything is up for grabs right now. So we have a ton of roof space, a ton of access to HVAC systems, boilers, lighting, curbs, parking lot. I think we're sort of taking an iterative approach. So as pilots come in, we're like using that as an opportunity to map the what we have on offer on the site. Our focus is, because we're New York City Economic Development Corporation, which is, if you're not familiar, quasi-governmental agency. We have a 60 million square foot real estate portfolio, and we have a remit by the mayor of New York and the city of New York to leverage that portfolio towards economic development activities around the city, and see this as a really great opportunity to provide access to these live environments for climate tech companies looking to scale in New York. And so similar to Jenny, I think we have a particular fondness for for hardware pilots, just because of the difficulty in getting those done anywhere else. And so, yeah, excited to continue to build up the capacity for the site. We'll talk more about the pilots we've done in a bit, but I guess I'll quickly call out that our very first pilot was an EV charging company based out of Brooklyn called It's Electric, that came out of one of the companies that one of the programs that we fund called the Founder Fellowship. And that was a great success and sort of led us to the development of the processes for this program.
Great. And so I guess one thing that we didn't mention is actually maybe a good segue to Lauren, who has a lot of waterfront space, but you both also being waterfront properties. Is that an element that you all are looking to utilize in your spaces as well?
Yes, definitely. So I think like south of the facility or north of the facility is the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, where we have a huge offshore wind presence. EDC is trying to develop an offshore wind manufacturing hub right there in Sunset Park. And so we recognize that there's a ton of innovation being done in offshore wind and adjacent industries. So yeah, like we are definitely open to blue tech, marine tech, shore power pilots. Yeah, it's a tremendous waterfront. I think similar to the art. I think it's I'm gonna get the number wrong, so I'll just stop there.
For us, we're still working through waterfront piloting. There's most of our waterfront space is actually leased. There's still a ship repair company that operates out of the Navy Yard. We've also got the harbor school. There's the Billion Oyster Project. Lots of sort of the ferry is also operating there. So there's little, the way we've approached it to date is just by identifying little slivers where things are possible, but there's just a few more parameters around it. We actually welcomed our first waterfront pilot to Yard Labs a couple of months ago. So we're sort of using it as a way to explore to what extent this is possible. Yeah.
Great. And speaking of water, Lauren, want to talk about Governor's Island and your program there?
Sure, absolutely. It's great to be here in such great company. And I think as we are telling these stories and sharing the details about our different assets, I think it's also important to mention that we're coming at this from a perspective of more is more. And it's all been very collaborative and exciting to embark on this journey together. So Governor's Island is an island at the foot of the city. I like to think of it, we like to call it the jewel of New York Harbor. It's about a 10-minute ferry ride from the southern tip of Manhattan and about 5 minutes from the Brooklyn side. This is a former military base that became a part of New York City 20 years ago. And to give you a sense of scale, it's, if you took a 15-minute walk through Central Park, for example, that would be traveling Governor's Island from end to end. It's been a long journey to arrive where we are today, where a few years ago, with the appointment of our president, Claire Newman, Governor's Island embarked on a vision to dedicate the entire island as a center for climate solutions. This is also building on 20 years of incredible public art activations, where we invite close to 30 arts nonprofits from around the city to activate the island each year, as well as what we like to think of as New York City's first climate resilient design park. It's also a public space and an open space with hills that rise up to 70 feet above sea level, and with plantings from as far south as South Carolina to experiment with survivability and biodiversity as the climate changes. And so building on that, I just want to take you through a little bit of my day-to-day arriving at this place. As an operational organization, we are on the island most days of the week. And so like many of you, I live in an apartment in a part of the city that doesn't have a lot of green space. And, I wake up, roll out of bed, I hop into the subway. After 30 minutes or 40 minutes of banging and clanging and being surrounded by people in a dark, gloomy place, I emerge, hop out onto South Ferry. From South Ferry, we're not the first ferry building you see, but we're the one around the corner. Beautiful, historic battery maritime building, and from there go on to our historic Coast Guard era ferry. which we're replacing with a hybrid electric next year. Very exciting. And so, coming out from the urban environment onto the vista of New York Harbor, traveling for 10 minutes on this ferry boat to a beautiful public space, really inspires a kind of change in your mindset, brings you into a different space where we believe it is more possible to imagine a different way of existing on this world, where climate solutions are inclusive, equitable, and accessible to all. And so with that, we on Governor's Island have all the different assets that you might imagine in a complete community. We have an old elementary school that that's being retrofitted into co-working space for Blue Green Tech. We have the park, we have old officers' houses, and most excitingly in April, we announced the creation of a new climate campus with the New York Climate Exchange that will bring education, workforce training, and programming for all. Not just those of us in the 5 boroughs, but accessing some of the climate issues and solutions from around the country and around the world. Now to get to streets, we do have 7 miles of streets which are car-free, and so that makes us an exciting place to do quick micro-mobility pilots. We don't have a lot of traffic to get out of the way, and I would also highlight too, it's a great place for kids to learn to ride a bike. And for me personally, a smart streetscape is one in which it is safe for kids to learn to ride a bike. It is safe to walk around with a cane or another mobility aid, or even to zoom around in a wheelchair. And so we hope to serve as a pilot testbed for solutions like that and many more across our buildings and across our waterfront. In our first year, so each summer with our new living lab, we'll be announcing new challenges. And for the first year, we are opening up our 2.2 miles of waterfront, as well as our piers, our dockable piers, to climate experiments that are open to all, that are public facing. And we're really excited to bring those pilots and to debut them early next year.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I guess in a quick summary, you've got you've got the waterfront, you've got low traffic streets, you've got, I guess, commercial scale buildings, even single family homes, which is interesting. And that sort of is the space, and the park, obviously, that you have to work in. And so, yeah, I'll also, as a moderator, but also as a operator, we're going to just talk briefly about what we've launched at OTI just 4 weeks ago, actually. So that's the Smart City Testbed, which we launched. And so it's an opportunity from within city government to utilize our assets, such as parts of the streetscape, working with our Department of Transportation, city buildings with the Department of Citywide Administrative Services. And so we sort of are looking at opportunities to utilize New York City at large as a testing ground for new technologies. And so, yeah, I mean, I think to Lauren's point, looking across all of these programs, there's really a nice diversity of opportunities and partners in which we can collaborate, and where other folks from industry, from academia, can collaborate with us and find the right fit for the product or service that somebody's looking to test out and to pilot. So moving on. So for folks that might be interested in piloting, working with any of us, who is eligible to pilot, and so what's the process for working in any of your spaces? Start with you, Andrew.
Sure. So as an engineering research center, actually one of our keys, so we have 4 components. Research, obviously, it's in the name. But we have the workforce development, so training of students. We have diversity and culture of inclusion, so doing things in an inclusive way, broadening participation. But the 4th one is to develop an innovation ecosystem. So it's actually really the core part of our mission is to work with industry. So as a predominantly academic research team, we can't do everything at scale. ourselves, and so partnerships with industry are really critical. So we have a membership program where industry joins our team as a true partnership, and also working with community stakeholders. That's another key element, and government. We actually are looking to pilot technologies in our testbed communities in New York City, and as I mentioned, the other two, one in New Jersey and one in Florida as well. And so that's sort of an active process, and it's about identifying the technology that makes sense. Also working together with community stakeholders to ensure that those projects are their priorities, aligned with their priorities, and also the way in which we try to execute are satisfactory to them. And so we have a whole community engagement process, which is very, very important and core to the way we are doing things and the way we plan to continue to do things. And I think that might be one of the distinguishing features of working, so to speak, in the real world, that that community stakeholder group is very, very important to us.
Mm-hmm. And if somebody wants to work with you and the Research Center, is there a way to sort of get into that process?
Yeah, probably. I mean, the most obvious way is through the industry membership program. So we're developing an industry member cohort, an industry advisory board as well to frame the research agenda, to provide mentorship to students, work closely with faculty. But yeah, that's probably the most direct way to engage with us.
Okay, great. How about you, Jenny?
So the technical answer is that anyone is able to apply to the program. But having said that, we do have a preference for that hardware-driven solutions and the focus on climate tech. Additionally, we are very interested in underrepresented founders, which gets a little bit to the Yard's mission. We are a mission-driven landlord, and that's one way of looking at the Yard. And so we want to make sure that our entrepreneurs and also our workforce reflect the makeup of New York City. So similarly, when we are piloting, we're looking for the same, and think that there's a lot of work that can be done there by our organization and via the kind of collaboration that we have with this group. We're also very city aligned. So right now, the very large city priority is decarbonization, and specifically looking at buildings, which make up about 70% of the city's emissions. And so the Brooklyn Army Terminal program, for example, that John runs, has a big focus in prop tech for exactly that reason. We have a strength in mobility, so we're continuing that, but looking ever more closely at prop tech solutions. So while anyone can apply, certainly if it sort of checks those boxes, it's really useful. I also think that for us, we've seen a range of stages of companies that come to us. Some of them are very, very early. Some of them are startups in their first couple of years. Some of them are later stage companies who are looking more for demos. Our kind of ideal is if a company has something that they're prototyping and they want to test it before they launch. But within that, so that's kind of our sweet spot. But within that, or having said that, we're very open to a range of possibilities. Also, because the climate crisis requires a range of solutions. So I think you'll hear that from us throughout whenever we meet. Is we want to remain flexible enough to be able to accommodate all types of different ideas that are coming to us. And so far, we've been pretty successful in seeing things all across the board with that kind of an approach or mindset.
And you have an application online that people can find?
Oh, the process. So we're a very relationship-driven process. So the best thing to do if you want to apply is actually to reach out. We have a yardlabs@bnydc.org address, or certainly you could reach out to me anytime, and I'll make sure that that you're able to set up the conversation to proceed to the next step. We actually spend a lot of time with site asset fit or pilot asset fit, where we're collaborating. It's a very, very collaborative process. So we're collaborating to make sure that it's scoped appropriately and that you're making the best use and leveraging our assets sort of to their fullest extent with your goals in mind. After that, there is like a physical application. Then you move on to operations review, and then you can launch and, et cetera. But very relationship driven. Talk to us, I think, is the bottom line there.
Yeah, maybe we can follow up with information with everybody's test bed or program links that can go out to anybody who's here on the Zoom. And are you providing funding for pilots? Are the pilots self-funded?
For us, the pilots are self-funded. We still do have a fee just to offset our operations costs. That fee is waived for the foreseeable future. But pilots should also know that there will definitely be insurance costs that they have to cover and a deposit until restoration to original state is completed as well.
Mm-hmm. And just to go back to you, Andrew, because you're NSF funded, are you able to bring funds to the pilots themselves?
So yeah, and that's a good point. So our core funding is from the National Science Foundation. These are the largest grants that they give. And so most of the faculty, student time, that is covered. However, obviously, if an industry partner wants to explore their own particular technology, and that takes us a little bit maybe away from what we would have been doing without that, then that might be a different discussion. But no, so we do, our core funding is there, and that's really good.
Okay, John.
So when we started the Pilots at Bat program, before it was kind of like publicly launched, we were looking for homes for innovation programs, numerous innovation programs that EDC funds. So we have an active partnership with New Lab. And so that's sort of the first way we continue to do pilots is through either we're part of the city, so either through innovation programs that we fund, or when our partners fund innovation programs, for example, like the Department of Transportation has an active innovation studio, also with New Lab. We're closely aligned on that project, and so we will make every effort to kind of accommodate space for electric vehicle pilots or micromobility pilots that DOT is doing. The second way we kind of, as we formalize the program, we launched the Pilots at Bat application. So there's an intake form similar to what Jenny was describing. It's open all the time. We review it in quarterly batches just to sort of consolidate the personnel effort required to go through these. And so that's open to everyone. We have, there's kind of an ideal company that is a company profile that's slowly starting to form. We want, we're a city agency. We have limited resources like any other sort of nonprofit. And so we're looking to maximize the catalytic potential of every pilot, meaning we want these pilots to really move the needle in companies' development. And so there's some evaluation criteria that tries to get at that, but like roughly, it could be a lot of things. It could be the early or growth stage company that's looking for their first project to get off the ground, to get a subsequent grant, or to secure some investment. It could be an international company that's doing quite well and is looking to make an entrance into North America or the United States. At EDC, we'd love for a company to sort of enter the United States through New York City. It could be diverse founders who have historically not had the same sort of access to capital or to these kinds of testing opportunities. There's sort of a tension between wanting like the most complex pilots and also wanting to do a whole lot of them. And so like you take like an energy storage project, for example, which has intersection with regulatory entities and requires hardware. Like that's in some ways that's kind of an ideal pilot because we're government. We can potentially work to sort of improve regulatory processes with a direct access to these pilots. And then of course that gets balanced with just like trying to do a lot of these types of projects. And then in the future, there's sort of like two ways we're excited about as sourcing functions. One is establishing direct partnerships with so many of the great innovation actors in New York City. EDC funds a lot of accelerator type programs The Urban Future Lab at NYU was a EDC funded project. There's New Lab. There's a whole bunch of NYCERDA funded accelerators. So more and more trying to build these partnership pathways so that we can provide a clear line of sight from these like expert sourcers and vettors to market traction in New York City. And lastly, something we're talking about and is probably a whiles away. We are also, as I mentioned, EDC is a facilities manager and a landlord, and has a very, very large portfolio, and it must be compliant with the same Climate Mobilization Act guidance, local laws that govern the rest of New York City. And so we're really excited to try to pilot technologies that we would like to eventually procure for one or more buildings or for our portfolio. And so the hope, as we're trying to build programming around doing some of these like innovation challenges, like the kind that if anyone's familiar with NYCHA, they have like they're doing amazing work with their Clean Heat for All challenge, where they're sourcing like custom designed heat pumps, piloting them, and then procuring for the entire NYCHA portfolio. We see that as like a really like best of all worlds approach, where we decarbonize our buildings, provide market traction for our growing companies, and are also solving our own portfolio challenges. So for now, though, like the piloted BAT landing page and intake form is the best way to engage with EDC.
Great. And then Lauren, how about your program? How can people get involved?
That's a great question. So on Governor's Island, we are big fans of learning by doing. And like these other programs, we're quite new. We just announced the Living Lab and the Climate Solutions Piloting Program in June of this year. And so what that means is we're currently reviewing our first cohort. I mentioned up top that we have a summer challenge. So our first year was the Water Abundance Challenge, and associated with that is a $10,000 grant, as well as additional $100,000 common pool to support deployments. And so that is one of two tracks to apply to pilot at Governor's Island. The second track is a year-round rolling application. Both use the same form, and both are open to startups and nonprofits that are looking to bring a climate solution into the real world, into an exciting public space for testing against a windy, coastal, and right now pretty cold environment. We've got, the 4 seasons here, and sometimes it comes down to, does our casing actually protect the tech that we've labored to produce, right? And so, sorry, our encasement or casing, either one. And so, with that, we're just getting started, again, learning by doing, and this is building upon more than a decade of inviting experiments onto Governor's Island. Right now, we have a couple of projects that came to us during the pandemic. Pulse Grids and the Circular Economy Manufacturing are both solar-powered shipping container installations that serve different purposes. One is entirely shippable in the shipping container, provides solar shade, that's Pulse Grids, and right now is powering our first renewable barbecue joint, a food and beverage concession on the island. The microfactory is similar size, but serves a very different purpose. It's a demonstration of plastics recycling that is solar powered and produces products with a mold. And so, we're just getting started again, and right now reviewing these water abundance pilots that touch on everything from the waterfront to gray water recycling and reuse potentially. So we invite startups and nonprofits into this, and again, folks that want a real world pilot and that are unafraid to do this in public view.
Great, and I think so for your program, Lauren, you're talking about a set challenge where you're requesting certain types of solutions. You also have a rolling admission for any types of pilots. John, you're setting yours up also. What's the cadence of reviewing and pilots? Do you have a window of applications? Is it also rolling?
Yeah, we're doing, so we have an application that's open at all times, and we have quarterly review processes. So like on the calendar quarters, first 2 weeks-ish of every quarter are devoted to review time. And we contact applicants like shortly after that window.
Okay. And Jenny, you have windows of applications that you're accepting?
Yeah, it's actually more a little bit more like what John is describing,
Okay.
where we start those conversations and technically the application is off and running.
Okay.
But the review happens the first the first 2 weeks of every quarter.
Okay, great. And in terms of the Smart Cities Testbed, which I run, we are also sort of open. We don't have a particular focus. Our goal is to really meet the needs and the challenges of city agencies. So, that kind of runs the gamut of all different types of applications, from mobility to transportation, climate, buildings, sort of you name it. If there's a need within a city agency, that's a solution that could be a fit. And so we also have a website, nyc.gov/testbed, which has information about our program. There's also an online application that people can fill out. It's also rolling admission, and we're going to be doing quarterly evaluations where we meet with different city agencies to try to matchmake and understand which pilots could be a fit. So a lot of the applications that we've had come in, it's a solution that's maybe not tied to one specific agency, but it's something that could work for multiple agencies. And so we'll be able to have those conversations with the agency partners, and any pilot that's going to move forward will have an agency stakeholder that is raising their hand to say, this is something that we're interested in, and we're going to work through the piloting process with you all as a stakeholder. Also similar to, I think, John, we're working in a self-funded model. We, as the city, will be able to provide in-kind contributions. So some of the pilots that we've started right now, the companies are providing their hardware, their service, and we're kind of taking care of the rest. We can do the installation and some of the navigation and things like that in terms of city assets and infrastructure. But we aren't we don't have a pool of money to provide the companies directly for the pilots. So these are unpaid pilots, but we are able to contribute in kind to kind of meet those companies halfway to get their products into use. So I think I'll jump, just being aware of the time, as it moves faster than you think. Let's talk about what success looks like. So I had two questions. I'll kind of combine them. What for you is a success for a particular pilot? And then what is success for the program altogether? What does that look like, let's say, in 2 years time? What would a successful program look like? And how does that relate to when you do a pilot or a research project? What does success look like?
Sure. So for us, obviously, deployment of something in the real world is really our ultimate objective, and that also spawn then industries, either startup or a licensed type of technology. So in this first year, so we're very nascent. We're focused on a couple of pilots. So one of them is around giving elderly or people with mobility impairments extra crosswalk time. So actually setting up the technology to be able to identify them, to understand from a traffic flow optimization point of view, what would the impacts be of adding that extra crosswalk time, that type of thing. And then, so obviously, there's a next step of actually changing the traffic timing, and that's something that needs to be obviously coordinated closely with the New York City DOT and the traffic management leadership there. So that's the kind of thing that we would like to deploy. Another pilot that we're working on actively right now is on wayfinding for the blind in urban environments. So that's a challenging problem. So again, to have infrastructure sensing the entire scene, assisting that individual in wayfinding. So that's another kind of thing that we would see as a successful deployment if we could get that running in the next couple of years. I think an important thing beyond just the actual implementation is also policies around how we implement. So for our center, privacy is very, very important around public space sensing. And so we feel that we're still kind of in the early stages of this in the whole smart cities movement. And I think government agencies as well probably need support frameworks and language also around how one can do public space sensing so that users, citizens get benefits, but not necessarily at the expense of obviously giving over a lot of their personally identifiable information. So we have a real focus on that. So for us, being able to develop those, help develop and shape those policies and frameworks in the long term is also a really important part of our, at least the way that we define success.
Mm-hmm. And then you also just talked about, I realized we didn't maybe mention this prior, so everybody can mention in their next response, but the time scale of the pilot. So you mentioned years for the projects that you're working on now. Is that going to be typical of
so
the projects?
The two I mentioned are ones that are very active. We're actually hoping that we can get sort of early, sort of usable, minimally viable sort of demos done by this coming summer.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not necessarily changing the traffic signals
Sure.
directly. But at least that all of the infrastructure, the computation, the closing the entire loop of an application like that would work. But no, we have our as a center, we have a 10-year time horizon for funding from the NSF. And so we are really thinking very long-term, really out of the box.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we need short-term successes.
Sure. Yeah. Jenny, success for a pilot, success for your program. Also, if you all want to mention like the time scale for how long a pilot might potentially run.
Yeah. So currently our pilots are running like 1 to 6 months. I'll just start there. But this actually ties into what success might look like for the pilots. We're thinking, so this first year of sort of official launch, we focused on the sort of shorter term pilots, and accordingly the scale of our expectations was that, it would either deployment is great, but honestly success is just like, it doesn't work, we need to pivot, or iterating, doing some sort of small iteration that opens up new ideas, new funding opportunities, et cetera. Like that to us was success. I think moving forward, we are tying our piloting into the development portfolio precisely so we can do larger scale pilots. They might take a few more years, maybe studio based, in order to get some of our shared goals of being able to inform policy. For us, workforce is very important. For EDC it is, well, for everybody it is, but for EDC it is as well. So tying in a workforce component as we're doing prop tech innovations, for example, that's an important goal. And so the longer the pilot is able to run within limits, and the more it's tied to a particular agency challenge or a challenge that we're having on the yard with our own sustainability and resiliency efforts, the more that we can, the success, the metrics for success change. So in those cases, the metric would be maybe policy change, maybe some sort of major workforce development initiative, et cetera.
Great, thanks. John?
Yeah, so our advertised timeline right now is 6 months or less. The two reasons for that are we're just sort of like trying to maximize our capacity, and then sort of like longer, like we sort of do these pilots just by giving like access licenses to our property. For success for the projects, we currently work really closely with the participating companies to define success together. I think the companies that we happen to be working with, they're sort of defining like we want each company that participates to have a publicly shareable case study that they can leverage to get subsequent investment or other opportunities. And so if the company is mature enough, they're commercial or just pre-commercial, then success is sort of demonstrating effectiveness, efficacy of the product itself. It's climate tech, so often that's like demonstrated energy reductions or decarbonization measured other ways. A little bit earlier, to Jenny's point, I think just having a concrete like product development opportunity at the end of it, like an iteration on a product or like a market, or getting like one concrete step closer to market readiness would be successful. We haven't yet interacted with that. And there's, we're kind of like working to define these over time as we get more data from pilots. For the program, over the long run, there's kind of like qualitative and quantitative. The qualitative is like we love hearing these stories where the pilot was very obviously leveraged to get, for example, a company comes in, they get an R&D grant from NYCERDA, and they produce a prototype, and they need a demonstration project to apply for now like the next phase up, like a deployment or a scaling grant. And so like by using this pilot, they're able to qualify and win that grant. That's sort of a qualitative. How tightly can you tie that to the pilot? Well, in that case, you can tie it like pretty neatly, but it's not always that neat. So that's sort of the qualitative aspect. And then quantitatively, and we'll run into measuring difficulties, I'm sure, is just how is the company doing 1 year out, 2 years out, 3 years out in terms of like all the things that we'd like to look at. So increase in headcount, increase in investments. Is there like an HQ that comes to New York? It's a little bit of guesswork, like how do you tie that directly to the pilot? But the combination of the qualitative and the quantitative, I think, is success for us.
Great.
So given our shared interest here in supporting equity and supporting climate solutions, I just want to start at a very high level by saying that the climate crisis has arrived. That a lot of people live in cities have experienced the impacts of extreme heat, of flooding, and as well have received education or are exploring ideas around living in smart and sustainable cities. And so for us at Governor's Island, we're firm believers that there's a strong intersection between innovation and education, and a strong interest as well in amplifying climate action, particularly when it leads to the development and practicing of equitable climate solutions. And so for us, what success looks like is leaning into the strengths that we have as a public space, that innovations that come here are in public view, and that there's an interest in supporting customer education, agency education, public education, youth education at every step of the way. To that end, for example, I give a lot of tours. If you ever want to come out to Governor's Island for a tour to see what we have, both sites that are ripe for piloting or the projects that we currently have on island, please reach out. To get deeper onto a specific example, last year we started conversations with Bicarb, which is now a sort of 1-year-old company, is that right? And familiar to a few of us here. They work out of the Navy Yard. And we're looking for waterfront access. So I mentioned this is something that's fairly straightforward for us to provide. This one in particular is on a National Park Service site. We were able to make an introduction and help facilitate that site permit, and then as well support on the programming side as the trust. And so in the few months that Bicarb, which is the carbon removal, I should describe them. So they're removing, you may or may not know that the ocean has absorbed 30% of carbon emissions since the Industrial Revolution. And so what that means is the pH is off balance. That makes it difficult for fish to survive, as well as for oysters, for example, to build their shells. And so Bicarb is using a natural process to absorb some of that carbon and into a stable state. And we were able to provide access for simply, an input and output tube to enable that natural process to do its work on Governor's Island. In the few months that Bicarb's been on Governor's Island, during Climate Week, they organized a demo day for investors and customers, and I was delighted to find at 8:30 in the morning, the founder Garrett and his team with a group of high school students. On Governor's Island, we have a public high school. And so it was, I think, a highlight of my climate week to see these 11th graders grilling the founder on his science at their pilot, and being able to see that technology and to really meet someone who has made a career in this work. Beyond that, Vicarb has met a lot of the traditional markers of success in fundraising with Catapult, for example, as one of their new investors in receiving their first customer, Stripe Climate, that purchased, I think, something like $58 million of carbon removal from them. And so, I mentioned earlier learning by doing. I think we're still learning by doing. We are looking for ways to offer support, whether that's letters of reference for government grant applications or for future investors, whether that is really just being available for questions. Given our quasi-governmental status, agency insight can be difficult to come by. And so setting up something as simple as an office hour, having open line of communication can go a long way. I think it's a little less about bulleting these benefits out at the outset and more opening up a dialogue. And so we see these pilots, whether they're on island for 6 months or 12 months, or even a little longer than that, that it's starting a relationship where there's mutual support and exploration towards addressing impacts of the climate crisis.
Great, thank you, Lauren. And I'll just mention for the test bed that I run, we're typically looking at 6 to 9 months for a pilot. And I think some of this was conveyed, but I think for us, success is potentially matching a potential solution with an agency, and then in going through the process of figuring out whether or not that solution is going to scale potentially. And so, we might be able to do a pilot, something that seems like interesting technology, and then we realize actually it doesn't fit how New York City operates, or it's going to be difficult to scale for this reason or that reason. So I think that's also for us, part of that success, to check that box. We tried this, it doesn't work for us. But then on the other side, hopefully we're able to find solutions that can work, that can scale, and then we can use those, to bring into, a procurement from a city agency, and utilize that in operations or design or things like that going forward, that can actually become a tool that the city uses to improve, our work for New Yorkers. So I see we're coming up at 11. Do you have?
I actually just wanted to take this success, like what does success look like us for in a couple of years, to do a little shout out to pilot New York City efforts. I think that for all of us, success in a couple of years is also being very closely coordinated and making it easier for companies to pilot in New York City by maximizing the amount that we're connected and really thinking deeply about our assets and kind of what fits in a pilot lifecycle or a company lifecycle or a solution lifecycle. Mm-hmm. So, we got to know each other very well this last year as part of an effort to do a real study in what piloting looks like in New York City and come up with a couple of recommendations that we're working on, such as a unified portal, aligning our application processes a little more closely. We've already done a lot of work there, but I think for me, that would also be a real marker of success, is if we were able to establish that pilot test network that Pilot New York City recommended. And it's a great read. Everybody should read it. It's a wonderful overview of what piloting looks like now and what it could look like moving forward.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think I mentioned at the top, this a paper between EDC and Cornell Tech came out maybe about 2 weeks ago. And everybody here has been kind of involved in one way or another. And yeah, it's a great point, which I missed, but I think we often have talked about, like, how do we create a front door to not only industry, but also academia, to find the right stakeholders within city agencies, within organizations, because I think probably all of us had that experience of, I don't know who to talk to. And so, I think it also probably even makes some of our lives easier to point somebody to a place where you can go to say, fill out an application and we can put that through a process as opposed to, cold emails that are going out to folks all over the city saying, hey, I have this thing, who can I speak to? So I think, I think it's helpful on all sides really to have that process in place. And, I think a bunch of us are already working together, sending each other pilots and saying, hey, this isn't a fit for us, but I think it could work for you and your assets. Or can you help me out with an asset to pilot? So yeah, can we take questions? Or I know we're at time, but I also want to kind of open it up to anybody here or on the Zoom who has questions or who are interested in, the programs that we've discussed.
Thank you so much for talking. We need the mic.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
we can bring an audience mic maybe.
And maybe announce who you are. That's always.
Sure.
You gotta do
You have to
the
turn
button.
on, yeah.
There's like a little green.
And also I'll just say if anybody's in the Zoom still and has questions that they want to type in the chat, we can probably field those.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Kalyani Shah. I'm a student at Civil Engineering Department in Columbia University, a master's student. My question is some of you mentioned some examples about the successful pilots you guys have, but I want to know, like, if you could share more examples, like what pilots you have worked on. And my second question is, everybody has a different vision of smart city. What is your vision, like all of you? What is your vision of smart city? Because that, if maybe you guys have different visions, and if integrated, can become a really different way of looking at the New York City or any smart city concept. So that's my question.
So in terms of successful pilots, first caveat, we've sort of like done pilot 0 with It's Electric, and then recently launched an application. We fortunately have a couple ongoing, just because I mentioned that EDC also has sort of formalized a process to support its active innovation programs. So there's the two I'll call out. There's It's Electric, and there's a pilot that was just recently installed called Conservation Labs. So Conservation Labs is it's a small like sensor that wraps around pipes in a residential or commercial building, like a wristwatch, and then uses AI to build a profile over like what normal dripping patterns sound like over the course of like a 15-day period, and then use like sort of like flags anomalies to drive improvements and reduce water waste. So that's actively company's doing quite well, actually. I think they're chasing their Series A right now, but they're deployed with like a major restaurant client around the United States. And so this is like, are using this to kind of like have a public case study with government to, we have I should have mentioned this at the top, but we have the largest like building stock and sort of like various competitive advantages in prop tech and climate tech because of that and because of our ambitious climate laws. So that's one. It's Electric. It's Brooklyn-based, part of the Founder Fellowship Program, which is a program designed to support diverse founders in tech. And this was their first deployment in New York City. Actually, they had funds because they won the Hyundai Innovation Challenge, and got to like do a really cool looking mural on one of the buildings, the bank building at the Brooklyn Army Terminal. There's a big press conference, and following that pilot, they've actually now deployed in 3 other cities with like larger projects after they've used this pilot to kind of like iterate through one or two cycles of product development. And then in terms of like what a smart city could look like, it's a good question. I deal mostly in climate, and I deal mostly the building and portfolio level. So like for me, it's probably, as like kind of a non-expert in this space, it's probably like there's just a lot on the table right now in terms of like data aggregation at a portfolio level. And then one level up maybe, which seems like pretty complex right now at the city level. And having all that data and being able to drive optimization based on that data is like the first step. So our asset management team and the energy folks are working to do that, at least at the portfolio level.
Yeah, I can jump in and talk about a couple of pilots. So, I think similar to how John mentioned, we're sort of just after launch. We kind of launched the program 4 weeks ago. We had a couple of, pre-program pilots in the hopper that we've been kind of working on to launch with. One of which is a pilot with a company called Building Diagnostic Robotics, which came out of NYU Tandon and now got NSF funding, and it's now a company that's spun off, and they use drones to do envelope assessments for buildings. So a climate tech a pilot. And so they're able to get data doing thermal scans and LiDAR scans of outside of buildings as well as rooftops to get data about thermal breaks in a building envelope, to do targeted retrofits to try to make buildings more energy efficient. So we are pre-pilot, so we're trying to identify buildings that the city owns through the Department of Citywide Administrative Services. We're also working with Jenny at the Navy Yard, and we're going to be scanning one of their buildings as well. And so we'll have that data and understand, how useful is that data? Is this something that DCAS, the Department of Citywide Administrative Services, can use to assess their buildings, at a greater scale? And so that's something that we're excited about. And then just briefly, I'll hand it over. But in terms of smart cities, some of the kind of characteristics that we think about, is equity, is the city equitable? Is it safe and healthy? So clean air, clean water, safety, not just in crime, but street safety. As Andrew was mentioning, some of his pilots about getting around, pedestrian safety, things like that. Carbon neutral or carbon zero. We have to, as was discussed, address the climate crisis, and so to be able to make inroads there, as well as some of the typical words that are used as smart city: efficient, right? Are we doing things efficiently within the city? Are we using data to make better decisions? Is working with the city a user-friendly experience? Those are all things that I think, from my perspective, make up what a smart city could be.
I'll just briefly mention a pilot that we love. Phalo Labs makes a they have two functions. One is they're collecting real-time emissions data from boiler systems, ambient air, et cetera. So that measurement that's going to be so crucial to enforcing local law 97 is happening with them. And then also they have a decarbonization device where for us, we're attached to one of our boilers and pulling out carbon from the exhaust pipe, but they also had another device that was in our lobby that just kind of measured the carbon in the ambient air as well. They're great. We love them anyway. They're a tenant of ours, so very much a part of our community, and very easy to work with, and just a wonderful company. But we especially like this pilot because they were able to give us a report that actually helps us with our own sustainability and retrofitting efforts. We're just now starting to get our arms around this. And so being able to actually see the first emissions data that we ever have for that particular boiler was really, really helpful in moving that conversation forward. And additionally, we were really happy to see how piloting with us opened up opportunities, even though the piloting that they did them for the devices that they already had, they were able to iterate a little bit, but it didn't move the needle in a big way for them in terms of market launch or something like that. What it did do is it opened up a number of procurement opportunities that we were able to connect them with, and some kind of ongoing conversation. So you sort of see a more their kind of user journey is a little more winding, and being able to use that pilot in order to expand and grow was really, really interesting. For the smart cities question, I'm actually gonna turn it over to Andrew, because I think this is a way that, you know, we can start to open up some of these conversations that we've been having as city-owned assets and really incorporate academic institutions into and research centers such as Cornell Tech and Columbia, and start to build partnerships and help us frame these kinds of bigger questions that you're raising that are also really important. But we normally are so busy with city asset and city goal type questions that we don't pause and ask. So thank you for the question, and I'd love to hear Andrew's answer.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So I see smart cities really as, you know, bringing in the sort of the digital layer into our infrastructure, the information sensing, but in two key ways. One is really offline, and the other is online. So offline is effectively taking all of that data, ingesting it to gain insight, to understand sort of our urban system, sort of from a scientific point of view, to understand the dynamics of it, and then to optimize, make more livable, efficient, all of those kinds of things. But one can also take that offline information to help for operational things and actually run things in real time. One can either pre-compute to optimize or make things more livable. But then there's the second part, which is that real-time acquisition of data and having really kind of a loop that's running live in real time, and to be able to you know, enhance, make more livable, all of the things that I think that Paul outlined. But that's sort of the way I view smart cities. But I think the other really important part that because, you know, as an engineering professor and an engineering research team, in our case, it's really important not to get too focused just on technical solutions. So it's absolutely critical to realize that some solutions that really can be working in tandem. That some things could be quite basic design decisions that you make, which don't require a lot of technology and are very robust. And that's something that one needs to keep in mind, so that that one isn't overly tech focused.
We have any, should we take a question from Zoom? Okay.
So you do one last question.
Yeah, sure. One last question. Okay, well, thanks to the panel, thanks to Columbia for having us, and everybody here that came in person. Really appreciate the time, and then hopefully, yeah, we can follow up with some links and information about everybody's program. So if there is interest in applying, getting more information, you'll be able to find them. So yeah, thank you all for joining us.